What the Moon Left Behind, a Creatures of Desire story about seeing what really lies beneath the skin of another person. The wolf arrived at 11:30, wrapped in oilcloth and delivered by a boy who would not meet Agatha Winterbourne's eyes. "Man said you'd know what to do with it," the boy said, already backing toward the door of her shop. "Paid me not to ask questions, I'm not asking any." Agatha had built her reputation on precisely that kind of silence. Winterbourne's Taxidermy and Natural Curiosities sat at the crooked end of Hollow Fen's High Street, between a shuttered milliner and a chandler who watched her comings and goings with the particular suspicion reserved for a woman who lived alone, kept no cat, and had once been seen kissing the vicar's niece behind the churchyard wall. That had been 11 years ago. The niece had married a curate in Leeds. Agatha had stayed exactly as she was, which was to say entirely herself, and Hollow Fen had eventually stopped commenting on it, the way a town stops commenting on whether it cannot change. She was 34, broad through the shoulders from years of wirework and bone setting, with hands that had been steady enough to reconstruct a golden eagle's wing from 4 remaining feathers and a sketch. She did not scare easily. But when she peeled back the oilcloth on her work table and found not a carcass but a chest still rising and falling, she went very still. The wolf was enormous, easily twice the size of any she'd mounted before, its coat a deep grey shot through with silver at the ruff, one hind leg mangled by what looked like a gin trap. Its eyes were closed. Its breathing was shallow, ragged, wet in a way that spoke of a punctured lung or close to it. Agatha had been asked before now to dispose of things people wanted forgotten. She understood the arrangement, but she had never once been asked to bury something that was still alive, and she found, with some surprise at herself, that she would not do it. She set water to boil. She found her sharpest, cleanest blade, the one she used for delicate skinning rather than butchery, and she set about cleaning the wound with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything. The wolf did not wake. Its leg would not mend straight, not fully, not without weeks of care it had no business receiving from a woman who stuffed dead things for a living. She splintered it anyway. It was past 2 in the morning, the moon high and full and merciless through her workshop's single grimy window, when the wolf's eyes opened. They were amber, not the yellow-brown of a real wolf's eyes, but a rich, burning amber, lit from within like whiskey held to a lamp. They fixed on Agatha with an intelligence that had no business belonging to any animal, and Agatha, who had handled corpses, bones, glass eyes, arsenic soap, and the occasional furious client, felt something in her chest drop away entirely. "You're not going to hurt me," the wolf said, except it did not speak, could not have spoken, and yet the words arrived in Agatha's mind whole and certain, in a voice like a woman's voice roughened by disuse. "No," Agatha agreed, because it seemed important to answer honestly whatever was happening. "I don't believe I am." She learned the shape of it slowly, over the 4 nights that followed, in fragments the creature gave her when the pain let her think clearly enough to give anything at all. The wolf was not a wolf. She was cursed or gifted, depending on which of her grandmothers you asked. A woman who became this each month, bound to the shape from moonrise until the moon set below the horizon, not merely until dawn as the penny stories liked to claim. It was moonset that freed her, not sunrise, and this month the sky had stayed wickedly clear, keeping the moon visible long past when any sensible night should have let it go. She had been running from a party of men with a gin trap and a grudge about missing sheep when the trap caught her, and she had dragged herself 1/2 a mile before the boy found her, and being a practical sort of boy in a town full of impractical superstition, had simply sold the problem to the taxidermist rather than solve it himself. "What's your name?" Agatha asked her on the 3rd night, kneeling by the crate she'd lined with wool blankets and old fox pelts, close enough to feel the heat coming off that enormous body. "Rebecca," came the answer, small and almost embarrassed, as if the name didn't suit a thing so large and dangerous. "It's Rebecca." "It suits you better than you think," Agatha said, and meant it, and did not examine too closely why she'd said it at all. By the 4th night the moon had begun, finally, to wane, rising later and setting sooner, and Agatha had stopped being able to pretend to herself that what she felt sitting vigil beside this enormous, wounded, devastating creature was merely professional curiosity. She had held vigil beside beautiful things before, a stuffed peacock mid-display, a case of butterflies pinned in perfect symmetry, but she had never wanted any of them to open their eyes and look at her the way Rebecca looked at her, amber and unblinking, and entirely too knowing. The moon set at 4 minutes past 4 in the morning. Agatha knew because she was watching the sky through the window when it happened, and so she saw, out of the corner of her eye, the wolf's shape begin to come undone, fur drawing back into skin, the great skull collapsing inward into something smaller, more familiar, devastatingly human. She had the presence of mind to look away until the change had finished, and to fetch a blanket before she looked back. The woman curled in the crate of fox pelts was perhaps 30, lean and long-limbed, with the same silver-shot dark hair as the wolf's ruff and the same impossible amber eyes, now wide with a very human, very raw uncertainty. Her leg was still splintered, still healing crooked despite Agatha's best work, and she was shivering from cold or shock or something else Agatha didn't dare name yet. "You stayed," Rebecca said. Her voice matched the one that had lived in Agatha's mind for 4 nights, low and a little rough, like it wasn't used often. "I run a shop of dead things," Agatha said, wrapping the blanket properly around her shoulders, close enough now to smell wood smoke and blood and something underneath that was simply unbearably her. "It's a novelty having something alive to look after." Rebecca's mouth curved, exhausted and real. "Is that what I am to you, a novelty?" "No," Agatha said, and her voice had gone quieter than she meant it to. "You're a great deal more trouble than that." She kept Rebecca above the shop for the better part of a fortnight, in the small room she'd never furnished, because she'd never expected to need it for anything but storing crates of glass eyes and jars of preserving fluid. Rebecca mended slowly, the leg knitting just slightly wrong in a way she said she didn't mind. "It'll heal true enough by the next full moon, it always does." Was stubborn that way, and in the mending, something else grew that neither of them named for a long while, because naming it felt like admitting how thoroughly it had already happened. Agatha brought her broth and bread, and once she trusted her strength, whiskey, which Rebecca drank like a woman who'd earned it. She learned that Rebecca had been alone a long time, moving from town to town before the suspicion caught up with her, that she hadn't slept indoors in a proper bed in longer than she could say, that she'd forgotten until Agatha, what it felt like to be tended rather than merely tolerated. "You're not frightened of me," Rebecca said one evening, watching Agatha's hands as they worked a piece of wire into the delicate armature of a Rebecca, an actual Rebecca, the small brown bird, ordered by a customer in York who wanted his late wife's favourite creature preserved on her mantel. The joke of it had not escaped either of them. "I spend my days making dead things look as though they might wake at any moment," Agatha said, not looking up from the wire. "You are, if anything, a pleasant change." Something that woke up and stayed woken. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, then careful, like she was testing the ground before she put her full weight on it. "I've frightened every soul who's ever known what I am." "I am not every soul," Agatha said, and finally looked up and found Rebecca already looking at her with an intensity that made the wire in Agatha's hands feel suddenly, entirely irrelevant. She set it down. What passed between them after that was not sudden so much as it was inevitable. The way a held breath is inevitable once you understand you've been holding it. Agatha had spent 11 years being careful, being discreet, keeping her wanting folded small and private the way she kept her rarest specimens locked in glass, beautiful, admired from a distance, never touched. Rebecca had spent longer than that being nothing but a rumour, a shape people feared, a thing hunted rather than held. When Agatha finally crossed the small room and knelt in front of the chair where Rebecca sat, when Rebecca's hand came up to rest along the line of her jaw with a tenderness startling in a body that had, days before, been built for tearing through fence and flesh alike, neither of them pretended any longer that this was about gratitude or curiosity or the simple novelty of company. "I should warn you," Rebecca murmured, her thumb tracing the curve of Agatha's cheekbone, amber eyes gone dark and molten in the candlelight, "that I am not gentle by nature, even in this shape. I have handled bone sores and arsenic and a great many things that could have killed me," Agatha said low, her hands finding the open collar of the shirt she'd lent her, "and I have never once been gentle either. I don't believe either of us wants that tonight." For a moment neither of them moved, as if the admission itself needed to be sat with before either dared act on it. Agatha could feel the heat still coming off Rebecca's skin, banked embers of the fever that had racked her a fortnight before, and beneath her palms the fast, unsteady drum of a heartbeat that no longer had any wolf's rhythm to hide behind. She had spent 11 years learning exactly how much of herself was safe to show a town that watched her sideways, and she felt every one of those careful years fall away at once, like a case unlatched, like glass lifted from something long kept still. It was Rebecca who closed the last of the distance, her mouth finding Agatha's with none of the caution she'd shown in every other exchange between them. as if the restraint she'd practiced through days of fevered convalescence had been a debt, and she meant now to settle it in full. Agatha answered in kind, one hand fisting in the collar of the borrowed shirt to drag her closer, the other sliding up into hair still faintly threaded with silver, and whatever careful order she kept in her workshop, every specimen labelled, every tool returned to its place, deserted her entirely. They moved without grace toward the narrow bed, shedding the practicalities of clothing between kisses that grew less patient by the moment, Rebecca's hands finding the laces of Agatha's bodice, with a dexterity that belied the days she'd spent barely able to stand, tugging until the fabric gave and fell away, and Agatha stood before her without a single thing left to hide behind. Rebecca's gaze on her then was not the assessing look of a woman deciding what she wanted. It was closer to the way Agatha herself looked at a rare specimen brought fully, finally into the light, reverent, hungry, faintly disbelieving of her own good fortune. "You've been looking at me like that for days," Agatha said, breath already unsteady, "and I let myself pretend I hadn't noticed." "You noticed," Rebecca said, guiding her down onto the blankets, following after her with the loose-limbed, unhurried confidence of a creature entirely comfortable in her own skin. "You simply have excellent discipline." "Not tonight, I don't." "No," Rebecca agreed, low and pleased, dragging her mouth along the line of Agatha's throat. "Not tonight." What discipline Agatha had left dissolved fully then, under hands that had spent a fortnight being tended, and now turned every ounce of that attention back on her. Slow at first, deliberate, as though Rebecca meant to relearn with her fingertips everything Agatha's had already mapped in bandages and salve. And then anything but slow, as the low sounds Agatha could no longer bite back seemed to strip away the last of whatever caution either of them had planned to keep. There was a wildness in Rebecca that the moon hadn't put there and would not take away with it either, something that lived under her skin in every shape she wore, and Agatha met it with 11 careful years' worth of hunger finally let off its leash, giving as good as she got, until neither of them could have said afterward which of them the low growling laugh had first belonged to. The candle guttered and went out somewhere in the middle of it, and neither of them moved to relight it. The dark suited them, there was nothing in it either woman needed to hide. Rebecca's mouth and hands found every place Agatha had spent a lifetime keeping folded away from a town too small and too watchful to be trusted with it, and undid that folding thoroughly, patiently, and then with considerably less patience, until Agatha's fingers were tangled hard in silver-dark hair, and she had entirely stopped caring whether the thin walls of the room above her shop carried sound to the milliner's shuttered window next door. When Agatha finally found her own way to reciprocate in full learning, with the same careful attention she gave every delicate piece of wirework, exactly what drew that rough, unguarded sound from low in Rebecca's throat, she discovered a fierce satisfaction in watching a woman who had spent so long being feared instead come entirely, helplessly undone beneath her hands. They came together again before the night was through, slower the second time, unhurried in the particular way of two people no longer racing against anything, mapping each other by touch and taste until neither felt the need to rush toward anything at all. By the time they lay tangled and spent in the narrow bed above a shop full of the beautifully, permanently still, the sky outside had gone the pale grey of very early morning. Agatha lay with her head against Rebecca's collarbone, listening to a heartbeat that had only hours before belonged to a wolf twice her own size, and thought that she had never in her life felt less like something kept behind glass. Neither of them had slept. Neither of them minded in the least. The moon would rise again in 3 weeks. They both knew it, and neither spoke of it that night, letting the knowledge lie quiet between them, the way a shed skin lies forgotten at the base of a tree. "I can't stay," Rebecca said eventually, weeks later, standing in the doorway of the shop with the dawn light catching gold in her hair, her leg healed enough now to carry her wherever the roads went next. "Not the way you'd want me to. There'll be another full moon and another town after that when this one starts to talk." "I know," Agatha said. She'd known it the whole time in the way she knew the fragility of a wing before she ever touched the wire. "I'm not asking you to stay." "What are you asking then?" Agatha considered the question with the same care she gave everything, the wire, the bone, the 11 careful years of her life. "That when the moon calls you back this way," she said, "you remember there's a door here that isn't locked to you, whatever shape you're wearing when you knock on it." Rebecca's smile, when it came, was slow and amber-bright and entirely unlike anything a stuffed and mounted thing could ever manage. "Then I expect," she said, "you'll be seeing me again before the next moon's done waxing." She left before the town woke properly, and Agatha stood in the doorway of her shop a long while after, watching the empty road, thinking that for the first time in 11 careful years, she had let something living get close enough to leave a mark, and had found, rather to her own surprise, that she didn't want to unmake it. The end. Thank you for listening to another Creatures of Desire story. If you enjoyed it, please like this story so it finds its way to other listeners, and subscribe to the channel for more Sapphic tales of fantasy and romance.